at the Philanthropic Foundation.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Rankin Mon Valley Pittsburgh section of the National Council of Negro Women. My name is Patricia Bluette, and I am the section's correspondence secretary. And joining me today is Alice Paylor Days. Alice is a member of the section's political committee. We thank all of you who have participated in previous programs, and we hope that you will join us again today with your questions by calling 412-853-8206. That number will be on the bottom of the screen. Our guest today is Mr. Fred Brown. He is the president and CEO of the Forbes Fund. The program today satisfies one of the National Council of Negro Women's mandate to educate women about economic empowerment and community development. Today's program will also support the National Council of Negro Women's Good Health Wins, the Women's Immunization Network initiative, and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control's Bridge to Access programs. Now, before we begin the show, we would like to introduce our special guest by reading his bio. Mr. Fred Brown is president and CEO of the Forbes Fund, an organization focusing on strengthening the management capacity and impact of community nonprofits within the city of Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania. Prior to the Forbes Funds, Mr. Brown served as the president and CEO of the Homewood Children's Village, a nonprofit with a multi generational approach to improving the quality of life in the Pittsburgh Homewood neighborhood. He also works for the Kingsley Association, developing green, sustainable communities. Mr. Brown has continued to invest his time, energy, and expertise in assisting a variety of communities and organizations to develop new and innovative programs that seek to empower at risk populations. Frequent speaker, trainer, coach, mentor, and consultant. Mr. Brown has a BS in education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a master's MSW from the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome, Mr. Brown, and thank you for being on the program today.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm great, and how about you?
It's been a long day and a long week.
But it's almost over. Just keep that in mind.
Not
First
for
of all,
me.
I know the weekend just continues on and on and on with a whole lot of more activities. So we'd like to get started. First of all, what are the Forbes Funds, and what is your role as president and CEO?
The Forbes Funds is an intermediary foundation supported by, we're a supporting organization of the Pittsburgh Foundation. We're 42 years old, created in 1982. The initial focus of the Forbes Funds then was to provide supplemental supports to organizations, specifically nonprofits, that may have financial challenges as a result of budget freezes at the state and federal level. And so the original focus was to help build the capacity of those organizations by ensuring their doors stayed open when there was lag in decision makings within the state budget and such. Over the years, we've evolved to look more proactively at activities garnering a healthy nonprofit and began to explore how to help nonprofits front load problem solving activity um, act, associated with funding freezes and things like that, to create operating reserves, to look at diversifying their revenue streams, and to also look at how they might increase their grant making opportunities within a very rich Pittsburgh and Allegheny sector. My role as president and CEO has been unique over the past 6 years. I can tell you what I've done to give you a sense of it. Every director or CEO may function differently. As a result of taking over the organization 6 years ago, the first thing we did an analysis of where we put $15 million. We created a geospatial grant making map to ensure that our activity aligned with the mission of the organization. As a result of that initial analysis, we froze our assets and restructured our grant making, focusing on the social determinants of health. We then took and partnered with the city of Pittsburgh in 2018 to help it become the second U.S. city to adopt the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We then took our core focus and pivot and reverse engineered the outputs of the social determinants of health and linked them to the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So what I did in year one was froze our assets, restructured our grant making to ensure that we were providing services to the entire region and making sure that it was fair and equitable distribution of resources. As a result of that first year freeze of assets and restructuring of grant making, we increased our grant making by 400% and have constantly did that year over year since I've been in the seat. On my second year in the seat, we partnered with the London School of Systems Change, and we basically created a micro, meso, macro, and global systems application of the region. And then we created what we call vertical and horizontal integration points to kind of test the strength of the nonprofits, and where we saw weaknesses or areas of improvement, we looked at targeting funding to create a more healthier ecosystem. The third year, we partnered with Nora Bateson out of Sweden, which is the International Bateson Institute, and we were looking at a lag in the humanity of the nonprofits and community stakeholders, and I would say cross-sectoral partners. And so in many instances, these organizations, nonprofits, come to a table to collaborate, and they're often seen as additional weight. And so we sought to change that perspective by increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of the nonprofits. The other thing we focused on is how do we help them become more agile, iterative, and also more conversive. And so the work with Nora Bateson explored this notion of how do you have courageous conversations and how do you do something called develop warm data labs. And warm data labs is basically a space where two or more institutions or people come together to solve a problem, but not from their designated titles, moreover, from their interest to fix the problem. The reason we did that was in many instances, when you have high profile people coming in to solve social issues, they come in as doctor this, JD this, attorney this, CEO this, and the real
Mhm.
people who are experiencing the problem don't have those titles. And so, in many instances, we would have meetings and the community wouldn't really be engaged because they were intimidated or felt like some of the
Mhm.
people in the room really didn't have their best interest or mind or understood it. And so we shifted the way we engage the community and we stopped going into communities telling them what we would do. And we went in and we started something called community coffees, where we actually went in and asked people what they needed, did an
Okay.
assessment of what existed already in the community, helped them realign those opportunities, and then move forward based upon their own desires, not ours. And so we become assistants in their trajectory, assistants in their movement forward. The fourth year uh, became this notion, and at this point in time, COVID hit, and so we called Nora Bateson up in Sweden, and because the Warm Data Labs was a person-to-person engagement, we had to shift it because of the physical distance and social isolation, and began to explore how we might do that virtually. And so Nora created and we supported the development of something called People Need People. We created a virtual way to do warm data labs. We facilitated 42 2-hour sessions with high level community leaders. And after having those meetings, we purchased 50 Zoom licenses. We created a real time feedback loop for organizations to get real time support based upon the impact of COVID. We brought on key stakeholders on what we call the call for community solutions. And basically, we cut through the red tape and created a B2B conversation, business to business kind of framework where community stakeholders can ask foundation leaders directly, how can I deal with this particular issue? And they can hear straight from the foundation leaders' perspective how to pursue the emergency resources associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our fifth year, what we noticed, and I'm giving you like what I do as a
Mhm.
CEO so that you can kind of understand
Right.
at a more tactical level. And so in our fifth year, as a result of us being in high level meetings at when COVID hit, um, we also saw a very critical issue happen. And it really reflected a lack of cultural awareness of the system's response to COVID. And so when COVID hit, Blacks were dying at 3 times the rate of our white counterparts.
Mhm.
We explored the issue of pre-existing conditions, diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. And we had a series of meetings with high-level folks and heads of hospitals to say we thought it was prudent to create a culturally responsive mechanism, given that COVID was having a 3 times the rate death rate of our white counterparts. To
Mm.
make a long story short, that meeting did not go well. We
Mm.
requested a meeting with the governor's office, which we were granted, and we began to have a series of conversations with Dr. Levine. We explained to her that we wanted to design a model that honored the history of resilient communities by focusing on FQHCs. Those FQHCs, Federal Qualified Health Centers, had a more trusted relationship at the community level. And my partner, uh, Mark Lewis from the Poise Foundation, and myself began to pull together a group of epidemiologists, epigeneticists, bioethicists, researchers, and doctors to really create a comprehensive response to COVID. We had developed 8 subcommittees to address this work. The Huddle, which is the Brain Trust, a data group to scrub data, because you got to realize at this particular time, none of the hospitals or institutions were aggregating data based upon race, other than whether or not you got the shot for the most part, or it was very limited. And so we began to really scrub down into the data at the community level to really see where the hotspots were. And so our data team did that. We had a group of doctors that advised us on medical procedures and processes, a community engagement team, a business team, a policy team, FQAC quality team, and then a stakeholder team. And so we basically did that work, partnered with Dr. Levine, and really created a robust process to really create a culturally responsive mechanism for COVID that was sensitive to the dynamics that existed differently in communities of color. And so as a result of that work, we've raised around $15 million for that work over the last 48 months. But I'm sharing that with you to say, this is not anything under our charter to do. And so what I do as a leader is assess what's happening at the community level, at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level, and figure out, based upon what we call inflection points, how we might as an organization need to pivot to address the challenge of the sector. So our fifth pivot as a result of what we saw as a result of COVID was, how can we get organizations on the ground to collaborate more? So we created a co-created ecosystem where we explored through asset mapping communities and organizations' assets, and we encouraged them to collaborate and partner so that we could reduce the duplication of effort and increase effectiveness and efficiency. And so our fifth pivots had us move towards this notion of transformational leaders versus transactional leaders. And so we created something called the Transformational Leadership Cohort, where we looked at using golf as a metaphor to deal with complexity theory. We gamified it so that emerging leaders of color, which quite a few got the nod as a result of the Great Resignation, our concern was a lot of young, talented people of color were getting ED and CEO positions without the skill set. Not that they weren't talented, but there's a far grave difference between being a program director and running an organization. Right. And so we began to help them explore at a deeper level, like, what does that mean? How do you function? What are the policies and politics of the time? What's the significance of your board? And so it's a very different animal to tackle. And so today we find ourselves at our sixth pivot. And our sixth pivot involves a macro level analysis and deployment of two things. One is the Entrepreneur Operating System, EOS, and it's out of a book called Traction. And so our theory of change is organizations have become over-reliant on grant dollars and almost feel like they can't make money because it's not right or it's not legal, and that's not true. Nonprofits can make money. They just have to spend their money at the end of the year or make a specific investment that's approved, such as an endowment or something of that nature. And all of these things have to be coordinated. It's just not automatic. And so we began to explore that, and then also said, how can we help smaller nonprofits be more effective and efficient? So we started to look at, 4 years ago, actually, developing a generative AI to help nonprofits tackle technology and use technology to aid their ability to do their work more effectively, thereby increasing their ability to have more face-to-face conversations. And so today, as a leader, what I find myself doing is being at the cutting edge of what's needed in the sector, maintaining relationships with the power structure, ensuring that we have competent staff that work cogently on the ground, and that our work is not creating what we call codependent relationships where people rely on us to get their job done. Moreover, we seek to empower and increase the capacity of nonprofits by strategically aligning them with assets, coaching, and resources to break the cycle of nonprofit poverty.
Very interesting. Ms. Ellis, do you have any questions that you would like to ask at this time?
Could you just go back and explain the difference between a community foundation and a private foundation? What's the difference?
A community foundation is resourced and focused on the community, it may have a series of donor funds, which somebody like you or I might want to create a fund because our one of our family members died from cancer, or a child got shot, or we got burned out of our house. And so those specific funds are then given to or invested in the foundation, the community foundation, with the community having a lot of control and support over how those resources get distributed, at least from the standpoint of, here's the targeted area I want this grant or my resource to support. The community foundation, by its nature, is intended to have at its functionality the community's best interest in mind.
Okay.
Family foundations, corporate foundations, and such function differently. Family foundations are ran by family members of the foundations, and they get to pick and choose the things that they want to focus on. And they're usually sitting on billions of dollars as assets, which they're protecting through the development of nonprofit activity as a way to safeguard some of their resources through these philanthropic efforts. And so the real difference, and then corporate foundations do the same thing. They create a tax break in their delivery in which these resources go. And in both instances, those resources have usually a 5 to 7% drawdown annually that could be used for philanthropic purposes. Now, in many instances, those organizations have supporting orgs or focuses that are unique to the mission of the foundation. But however, in the family foundation, there's a lot more control of what happens at the end of the day by the family. Mm-hmm. And in the community foundation, that activity is more controlled by the board. They both have boards, but one board is mostly comprised of family members or specific people targeted. The other board is comprised of a combination of corporate interests, community interests, foundation interests, and such, where it really represents or models the community it serves, and the people making decisions about where grants go have a germane understanding of the community's needs.
Okay, good. So what procedures or steps would be followed to get grant funding from the Forbes funds?
From the Forbes funds, we'd use a asset map. As you know, many people write grants or have requests, and sometimes there are opportunistic opportunities to take advantage of a grant interest level or focal point. But before we address a grant desire, we first do an assessment of the organization. It's almost like some of these programs to make your house better, people want to get new floors put in their house, but their roof is leaking. So which one is first? Fixing the floor or fixing the roof? And so sometimes people want their floor fixed, but they really need their roof fixed first. And so our assessment tool does a critical analysis of every organization, and it helps us pinpoint where the resources best used for this particular organization. That's one. The second one is 6 years ago when I came on board and froze our assets, my philosophy is quite simple. No single organization can solve the day's problems by themselves. So anybody writing a grant to us by themselves just doesn't seem logical that you're going to solve many things. And so the increase in our grant making by 400% is largely due to people coming together writing collaborative grants, not just individual grants. So we also look strongly at that. So basically, to get a grant from us, you need to petition our leaders that run our grants and ask them what we're working on and what our interest areas are. They shift, and so they're not stagnant. We're always interested in capacity building of organizations, but we try to make sure our grant requests align with one of the 5 social determinants of health. And so we look to those areas and people that are interested in solving issues based upon their ability to pinpoint those particular focal points.
Oh, okay.
And so once people decide to submit a LOI, letter of interest, and they complete their assessment tool, we take their requests and our team meets with them to kind of iron out what makes sense, what might be a priority, what doesn't make sense. That organization or set of organizations completes an online application, that application is then turned over to the CRAB. So we partner with the University of Pittsburgh's Community Research Advisory Board, the CRAB, and they have a set of guidelines they look at every grant from and determine whether or not the grant focus and the way the grant's written and the suggested impact aligns in a way and it gets scored. And so we remove ourselves from judging the grant because of personal bias we might have, and we ship the grant out to a non-biased institution that has rigorous research. They give it a score. It comes back to us. We take it to our board for a vote. Our board either approves the grant or they don't. And so what we do is really, we play the role of bringing somebody to the table, increasing their grant's ability to cut mustard, making sure that their grant has the core competencies in it to get past the CRAB. And then, in some cases, the CRAB will strike a grant down and say it needs more things. And so we go back to the organization and say, hey, your grant needs to have these things addressed if you want your grant to move forward. If not, you can not want to move forward and we're not going to support it. And so in essence, once you get in our loop, it's highly unlikely that you won't get funded, right? As long as you adhere to the stuff that we're asking you to do to meet the requirements. In some cases, when you ask for a grant and it doesn't have anything to do with us, the likelihood of that being supported is pretty low as well. So we really have a specific focus. And the thing that's shifting for us is, as I told you in the 6 pivots, is our grant making is really looking at what's needed right now and not trapped in historical practices. Although we have maintained historical programs, we've shifted the way those programs operate given the stressors and shocks in our ecosystem.
Okay, Mr. Brown, we have a caller on the line. Caller, are you there? Well, the caller actually put something in the chat line. It says, what are the 5 social determinants area considered for grant making?
That's a great question. So we look at education, we look at the built environment, we look at health and healthcare, we look at economic stability, and we look at education, built environment, economic stability, housing, and healthcare.
Okay. And what are some of the community projects funded by the Forbes Fund?
So we do what we try to do, or what we focus on. We don't try to do. We focus on what we call catalytic activity. And so the catalytic activity we focus on, for example, historically, how the Forbes Funds function for 37 years, right, was 35 years, 37 years, was an organization came in, they had a problem. We have a group of consultants that work for us. That organization's grant was approved, and then they got to select a consultant from our team. We paid the consultant to do the work for the organization. We still do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a secondary support of an organization, in my opinion, right? Some organizations need capital to do what they need. Some organizations need to build their capacity, which that was an example of. Some organizations need to address organizational issues, which is another kind of grant. And so we have grants called the Executive and Residence Program or Management Assistance Grants. But the grant that I'm thinking of right now that is, catalytic is called our Catalytic Community Cohort Grant. And that grant is focused on a unique set of principles. So we targeted, there are 90 communities in Allegheny County, 43 are comprised of people of color. Of the 43, there's 80,600 people of color. Of the 80,600, 46,000 of those people are on probation and parole.
Mm. Interesting.
And so when we start talking about how do we help, we have to reconstruct how we think helping people looks, because programmatically, there's not a lot of programs that could fix that. So our theory of change is, how do you create a systems response where multiple organizations are working together to address homelessness, economic stability, education, health and healthcare, the built environment. And so the social determinants of health allow us to pinpoint where we put resources. And because we focus on 5, it also allows us to explore what is the collective impact of that activity. And so our real focus through the Cali Community Cohort, which is a new grant that we just came up with in the last few years, was, can we invest in an emerging leader up to $100,000 and support that leader to pick their own team? And that team of people is a group of people they respect and want to work with to solve issues. And so the difference is, over the years, many funders have requested people to collaborate, and people have come together to collaborate only to get the money, right? And then sometimes collaborations get money, they do the work, and then they dissolve after the funding runs out.
Exactly.
And so we think that's a transactional relationship. We want to create relationships where people are committed to being together beyond the grant and make it more than money. And so one of the examples is we helped a group start a Chamber of Commerce, the Mon Valley Chamber of Commerce, right? Work with Lisa and her team. And basically what we did was take an emerging leader, and then we had a coach of a high-performing organization. In this case, it was Google. Google was their partner. They got money to pick a community team to solve their housing issue and to create a chamber. They created a chamber which allowed them to express the community's interests strategically and pragmatically around housing, business decision, residency, new businesses coming in. This whole thing really changed the landscape for them. Also, the relationship with the Google representative also fostered Google wanting to become a board member, which was a hope, but not a guarantee, because of the intimacy now Google had with helping an organization come from the ground up to create a macro level system, right? Where they were working across a myriad of things. And so what we do is say, okay, if we invest that resource in you, don't spend all of the money at one time. Leverage our platform and our network to get more bang for your buck. And so one of the organizations I worked with during this time was the Healthy Village Learning Institute and Keith Murphy's work in McKeesport. And so he's a recipient of our C3 work, and he hasn't spent down his money in 4 years. Why? Because when COVID first hit, Keith wanted to spend $50,000 on computers. This is an example, right? And he called me up and said, hey, I want to spend $50,000. And I was his coach, right? And so what we did was try to create organizations where somebody knew enough about the organization and what they did, but they might have been running a $40 million company, and here's somebody running a $1 million company. How can somebody running a $40 million company advise this person, hey, you don't want to do that. You want to focus on this. This is how you go from 1 million to 3 million, 3 million to 9 to 15. Like, this is the process, right? This is how we did it. You can learn from it or do it your own way. But the choice is, I've already traveled this pathway. You haven't. I'm an asset to you. And if I like what you're doing, I might open up some doorways. So all of that happens. So in Keith's case, he called me and said, hey, I want to spend $50,000 on computers. I said, man, that's a noble cause. However, I was just in a meeting. I said, let me make a phone call to see if we can get you some computers without you paying for them. So I had been in the meeting earlier in that week, and I went back to my program officer and said, hey, I have an organization I'm working with in McKeesport. Can you get them computers? And the foundations had purchased a lot of computers. I went to the superintendent of schools in Pittsburgh, asked him would they help facilitate that. I also asked him to create a universal training program for Southwestern PA, given that all the schools went to hybrid or virtual frameworks, and they didn't have a shared platform for how teachers would learn how to do something overnight. And so what we do is we play the position behind the scenes or in the walls to help problems get solved. And in many cases, we're not even visible. And so in this case, Keith was able to not spend $50,000. And then we said, well, Keith, what do you want to do? Why did you want the computers? And he wanted to create learning hubs while kids were out of school that were culturally specific, and also created, or his real target was, he was concerned about seniors, rising seniors, not going to college as a result of COVID. So
Okay.
great concern. I said, hey, Keith, let's talk to Penn State, Greater Allegheny. Let's see if they will do. I called the chancellor of Greater Allegheny, and I said, hey, what are your kids doing since COVID hit? Nothing. I said, would you be willing to, if we paid you to pay them, could they mentor kids in high school and do like a peer-to-peer process to help these kids stay focused so they could get to school? They said yes. Then we reached out to CCAC and said we want to create a secondary track for kids that may not go to school as a result of COVID and may choose to do a vocational track. Would you get involved? We met with PTC, Pittsburgh Technical College, did the same thing. And then we started sharing an idea of like, what if you guys adopted a 2-gen model, a 2-generation approach, where the universities and colleges train parents and kids around technology so that when they got home, if the dad or mom was doing technology and the kid was doing technology, they can have the same conversation.
Right.
And so that's an example of us taking a problem, restructuring the response mechanism, not allowing them to spend money where they could get some of this stuff at no cost or at a reduced cost, and then saying, okay, and this, I hope this is clear to you. This is the difference between transactional and transformational work. We could have just cut the check and say, hey, do what you want to do. Let us know how it goes, blah, blah, blah. But my theory of change is, having worked on the other side for 30 years, if I get a check cut for doing this and I don't find a way to make it regenerative, I'm going to come back again and ask for the same thing. Ask for more money. We don't have that kind of money. We're not a multi-billion-dollar institution. We raise money to give it away or invest in people. I should not say give it away. We invest in people. And so our theory of change is if we can get them to access assets and use their money strategically, that would be more catalytic because they can really discern whether or not the people that they're working with are committed to the thing or trying to get the money.
Okay. We have another caller on the line who would like to ask you a question. But the one that I'm going to call on now, this is Donna from Homewood. Donna, hello. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Great, great, great. Well, welcome to the show. And do you have a question for Mr. Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, I have two. The first one is, I'm not sure, whether you covered this or not, but there was a while where the funding sources and they were drying up and there weren't as many places that you can get funding from. Does it appear that it's loosening up now where more people are able to get grants now?
I would say...
That's the first question. I'll wait.
Yeah, the first question is, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, many of the foundations have went under 1 and 2 and 3 year strategic plans. So a lot of their funding was froze, except for extreme cases where they were trying to figure out, as a result of COVID, and in some cases before COVID, are resources being used in the most expedient way to solve problems. So almost every foundation in the last 5 years has went under a strategic plan. Now, as they came out of those strategic plans, they had already warned some organizations that they would no longer be funding them and told them 2 and 3 years ago. What do you think happened? A lot of organizations didn't have a transition plan. They were like, okay, when it runs out, we'll just keep asking. And they were like, well, we're not going to keep funding that. And so one of the things that's a problem, and that's why we're doing what we're doing, is how do you get people to take the resources they get and think about it more as a business investment versus just writing a grant? And so that's what we really are focusing on now. And that's really the essence of the 6th pivot. I would say that what people didn't understand too, to your question, is when COVID hit, $10 million were drawn out of the foundations to address COVID directly. What people don't realize is that $10 million came from somewhere. It wasn't in addition to their grant making. And so that $10 million had a direct impact. The third thing is the foundations are driven by the stock market, how the economy is doing. When it goes down, their assets lose value. When it goes up, their assets gain value. And so on an annual basis and quarterly, we have these significant meetings with investors about what's the status of our resource, what's the status of the endowment. And so if the economy tanks or goes down, it also affects the amount of resources the foundation distributes on a year-to-year basis. In short, they've dried up. I would say they haven't dried up. They've shifted. And as a result of that shift, a lot of organizations have not kept pace with the shift.
Okay.
So
your second question, Donna?
Okay, but for this first question, are you saying that it's beginning to look a little brighter for organizations to get granting, or they just have to adjust what they do in order to get grants?
The second one, and I would say it's more difficult because, okay, there's a couple of foundations that have adopted EOS, right? I can guarantee you 99% of the people you talk to don't even know what that is. A number of foundations are also looking at metrics, how you measure, what analytics you're using. A lot of small organizations don't measure anything. And so this is affecting their ability to get large sums of resources and investment. And so foundations will continue to support smaller ideas, 50,000 and less, but they also are looking at innovation. And so the challenge that organizations have is they might have been doing something for 10 years and being the darling of the foundation, but not getting real money, right? I mean, organizations have to be able to pass an audit. They have to be accountable for their resources. The foundations very seldom give organizations millions of dollars if they don't feel confident that they can, number one, execute the task, number two, have some level of accountability, and three, safeguard the resources. And in many instances, the smaller organizations don't keep good books because they're too busy actually doing the work, which is why we designed what we did over the past 4 years, which is launching now, which is the launch of our Skilly tool, which is our generative AI tool, because we don't want to punish organizations that are doing good work because they don't have enough staff or resources to tackle all the tactical aspects of that work. Can technology tackle those things and help organizations to do people-to-people work, do that more effectively and efficiently? And can they do it in a way that reflects the interests of the foundations?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Donna, do you have a second question?
I do. I'm not sure whether, I'm asking it right, but can a 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt organization receive funding from a monetized YouTube channel? Like if the organization gets on YouTube and becomes monetized, does that violate their 501c3 nonprofit status?
Not to my knowledge, no. And I will talk to some other folks on Monday to get you a qualified legal answer. But if you think about this, the difference between a nonprofit and a corporation is at the end of the year, the nonprofit's budget has to align with its execution of resources. If you are using a YouTube channel to raise money for the organization, as long as that money is cleanly lined up with a line item that this is for operational support, and it's exhausted by the end of the year as a result of the target objective, then you should be in good standing. The issue is when people make money and sit on it and roll it over, there are some liabilities for that. And so that's the difference between a corporation and a nonprofit for the most part.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you for calling in. Alice, do you have another question?
Well, there's another question from a caller. How are the grants monitored and evaluated on an ongoing basis?
That depends on each organization. As far as if it's us, my team meets with the grantee frequently. We call them partners, not grantees. So we invite them to things all the time. We look at areas that we think they should support, have more support in. We might host a meeting to get them seen by other organizations. We might reach out to other funders to see if they would be interested in partnering with us to support a particular project. It depends on the organization. And so if you're one of our grantees and one of our partners, you get a lot of invitations to stuff, and it's up to you to participate. But the impetus of those invitations is really to create multiple ways for you to be successful. And what it shows us is, will you do the other work besides taking the money and build the relationships that takes the resource you got and grows this ability to do more through strategic collaboration. And so we kind of...
So in part, as part of that, you offer capacity building training for nonprofit organizations to make sure that they're on board. Okay.
So for example, that's a great question. We do. So we have something we call the Forbes Funds University. So we want to do something for nonprofit leaders that ensure their academic proficiency. So we offer 3 things in the Forbes Funds University: college credits, CEUs, and certifications. Also within the Forbes Fund University is a set of training tools to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization. As a result of COVID, we doubled down on 3 critical things: succession planning, operating reserves, and scenario planning. Because when COVID hit, a number of organizations kind of went off the cliff because their leader left, and because a lot of foundations are driven by the relationships with the leader, a lot of foundations stopped funding organizations because we had, as a result of the Great Resignation, a lot of leaders deciding to walk away. And so new people got put in their positions that didn't have the same relationships with the foundations and didn't get funded, right? And that's the nature of the game. It's like, you know, this is what's hard for people to understand. I'll give you an example. So when I first came on board 6 years ago and I was meeting with foundation leaders and I started bringing my team to the meeting, never been done. And so the foundations were asking me why I was bringing my team. I said, because I'm asking you to invest millions of dollars in what we're doing. And I don't want you to say, well, Fred, how are you doing that? Because Fred is not doing that. These people that's on my team are doing that. I'm the brain trust or the thought partner or whatever, but I'm the high-level executioner of the idea. They're the practitioner of it being on the ground. And so what I wanted the foundations to see is that we have hired very competent staff members who you can entrust us to be good stewards of your resource, because look at our team. They're very proficient, right? Before that, it was just me coming in the room saying I wanted something or I wanted an investment. And it got a lot of scrutiny because people were like, well, you got another few million. How you going to do that? How you going to do this? And it was like, well, of course, I'm not going to be able to do all of that. I have a team. But in some of these instances, some organizations don't have a team. It's a one-person show. It's a 2-person show. And so the foundations are leery of making significant investments if organizations' infrastructures don't match the requests.
So how often does the focus of the funding change?
Well, that's a great question. In my estimation, the average focus is 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So,
is that good or bad?
Excuse me?
Is that good or bad?
Let me say it like this. If Homewood has been disinvested in for 40 years, and Wilkinsburg for 30 years, and Larmer for 40 years, how is 3 or 4 years of funding going to fix 40 years of disinvestment?
Okay, right.
Yeah. Right.
And so now you got to be creative as an institution to go after money, because every 3 to 5 years, the funders will go, okay, I'm not that interested in education. I want technology. So now you got to weave technology into education, which you can do. But if that's not your strength, if your strength is tutoring kids, what role does technology play? It could play a role, but how you execute it may look different, right? If you do peer-to-peer coaching, like for a lot of, like if you think about 2Gen, we make all these investments in kids, but they go home to broken systems. And we don't make the same investment in parents. And so we can predict that a large number of kids who are doing well, once they go home, will lose some of their capacity to do well because in fact, it's not being supported at home the same way it might be supported in the program.
Right, right.
What is the best way to communicate with funders? In writing, site visits, personal meetings? What do you suggest?
All of them, right? First of all, the first thing to do to meet with the funder, my rule book would be ask to meet with them and ask them what they're interested in. Don't even make her ask the first, second, or third time.
Okay.
So if you're looking at a funding period a year from now, 6 months from now, you should be on the horn asking for a meeting with a grant officer or foundation leader, and don't even go in there saying, well, here's what I want. Go in and say, hey, I understand the Hines Endowment just hired a new CEO. Can somebody tell me what y'all focus is going to be and what y'all looking at? And just sit down and listen, take notes. And say, is there something that is of a specific interest to you that you guys want to tackle this year? They'll tell you. You might walk out of the meeting saying, we're not doing any of that. So we don't, you can still maintain contact with folks, see if there's another interest area, but the key thing is first seek to understand. I mean, I don't know how many people follow Covey, but Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is critical. Be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first. First seek to understand, then be understood. That's a critical function. Most people want to be understood. They come in and say, hey, this is what I want. I might not do what you want. So you just wasted my time and your time. And now you're pushing to get money from me for something I don't do. Like that happens to me a lot. Like people say, I need some money. I need you. I'm like, well, did you look at our website? Did you talk to anybody? We don't do that. And they're like, well, you do give out. I've had friends that I've had for 40 years stop speaking to me or be mad at me because they was like, you never wrote me a check. I said, I haven't written me a check. Do you think I got a checkbook in my office and I'm right? Like, I sit under a $2 billion company. Do you think I just get to write a check? There's stages, there's levels. I mean, multiple levels before a check gets cut.
Okay. Well, who makes the final decision about which programs get the funding?
Our board. And for us, the CRAB. So even the board makes the final decision. The CRAB could say, this ain't a good idea. But if board members are like, we want that to happen, then there's a plan to take the request and make it meet the, like if the board wants it to do this, this, and this, we'll go to the organization and say, if you're willing to do these things, we can get you the money. But if you're not, we won't. And so the board makes the final decision, but we weigh heavily on the work of the CRAB because that's a non-biased analysis of an organization that gives us clear line of sight that this ain't personal.
Okay. Well, as usual, we're running out of time. So, Alice, do you have one more question?
What does the CRAB stand for again? The CRAB?
Community Research Advisory Board.
Advisory Board. Okay.
At the University of Pittsburgh.
Where's your focus at for the next 3 or 4 years?
Our focus is on building the capacity of nonprofits to move from being solely grant-driven to diversifying their revenue streams, one. The second thing is, once you figure that out, how can technology aid in that process?
Okay.
Right? Okay. That's our focus. Our focus will always remain, we want you to do that collaboratively. We want you to focus on the social determinant of health. That will not shift. But the target objectives are, if you're already doing those things, do you have a business mindset? And so we started something in the Forbes Funds University called Entrepreneurial Mindsets for Nonprofit Leaders. Like, how do we get nonprofit leaders to think more entrepreneurially? And I mean, I can't tell you how many people think it's illegal for nonprofits to make money. Like, they're like, that's illegal. You can't do that. I was like, who told you that? That's not true. Every nonprofit can get contracts. DHS, look, what we're doing now, for example, DHS funds a lot of stuff. It would rather have a contract with you than fund you. Oh. Because it can anticipate, if we contract you to do feed 150 people a day, that ain't a grant. That's a tangible, measurable job that every month they can see the data and discern whether or not you're hitting the business quota or not.
Okay.
If they give you the money up front and you don't deliver it, it's a loss for them. So it's like people don't realize the business approach adds value to your ability to diversify your revenue stream significantly.
Well, this has been a fascinating 1 hour, and I mean, it went
We
by
have to
too
have,
quickly.
we have to have him back. We have to bring him back again.
Yes, because there is still half the questions we have we didn't even get a chance to ask. But before we thank our guests for appearing on our program, we would like to say that the Good Health Women's Immunization Network, Good Health Wins, is our commitment to building an army of good health champions who understand the importance of immunization across the lifespan. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, Bridge is to Access program is currently offering free COVID-19 vaccination for the uninsured and the underinsured. And in order to find out more about them, once again, I said they were free shots. You can call 412-979-9685 for more information. We'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to inform our audience about the Forbes Fund and the great work being done in our communities. And we'd also like to thank our listening audience and those that called in for tuning in. And we invite you to join the National Council of Negro Women by calling 412-867-9641. And Fred, men are also allowed to join. So keep that in mind, okay? We'd love to have you as a member. And you will get some information about the program and a brochure and an application. So remember, that number is 412-867-9641. We need your help to educate, advocate, and positively impact families and communities in the Rankin, Mon Valley, and the Pittsburgh area. Remember, our live program airs on the first Friday of every month at 6 o'clock p.m. And please remember, get vaccinated, please. Thank you so much, Fred, for joining us this evening. Alice, thank you also for coming on. And everyone have a wonderful, fantastic, and a safe weekend. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Oh.